Mixing with my boot camp tip, selecting a console and sound for your mix. Let's head on over to Pro Tools. What I have here is a mix, and what I've done is I've gathered together in this song maybe 12 or 15 of the most important elements of the mix: the bass, drums, couple of keyboard guitar tracks, and vocals. And what I've done here is just to kind of show you a little bit of something about how I work and the reasons why I work the way that I do. In the analog era that I grew up in the 80s, everything was tape based with analog consoles. And so when you actually played back, you recorded a song, you recorded it to an analog tape. The analog tape had a certain sound based on the speed, tape formulation, and the machine that you were using. And when you went to mix it, you were mixing it through a console. And all along that way, through the whole process of mixing, would be the same tape machine, all with the same settings, and the console, all with the same settings. Now, I never really thought about it much because that was the only option that was available until I got inside the DAW. And what I realized was missing after a while was that there was no sonic signature to a DAW. And people might talk about how, Pro Tools sounds better than, Logic, or Logic sounds better than Cubase or whatever. I'm just making this up. I'm not trying to make any political statements here. But the bottom line is there's no real sonic signature there. And I realized, well, if I work in a console-based technology, perhaps with or without tape emulation, I might capture some of those same characteristics that really glue together a production and make it feel like it's coming from a particular place. Then I can highlight certain tracks like vocals with different processing to give it a little bit of extra sparkle and contrast to the rest of the mix. So the process doesn't mean that you go through and do a full mix with 5 different consoles. I usually pick 2 or 3. And more or less the way that I work is I go about the process by selecting a console, say like the J series console here, and I will just start to work with it. I'll start with the EQ. So I'll EQ the kick drum, EQ the bass, EQ the vocal, go through some of the instruments and just get a sense for how it feels. I'll apply the compression, see how it responds and how it reacts, and get a sense for what it feels like. This is not about making everything sound perfect. It's getting a quick feel for whether, say, for example, the SSL-J is the right answer, or maybe I tried the same process working with an API console. So I pick an API console, and then I start EQing with this, compressing with this, and applying different settings. So I'm going in and I'm creating, kind of a quick mix just to get a feel for what that feels like. Maybe I switch over and I, do a BX console right? The VXS console from the late 90s, Neve. Or I check that out and I want to see, well, does that sound better than the 88RS, which is the console that followed it in the early 2000s? That was also a great sounding console, but has a very similar characteristic. Or do I want to go something, the latest and greatest that's out, which happens to be this LSR 50 series plugin, which gives me an API emulation. Now, generally, when I go into a process like this, I will decide based on what I feel the production needs. So if I listen to the production, I think, wow, there's a lot of sampled sounds here, maybe sampled strings, and the libraries have a tendency to sound a little digital. So maybe I want to have something that's a bit richer, and maybe I go ahead and I select like the 80 series console to get a classic Neve 80s vibe. Maybe I want something that has more aggressive mid-range. Maybe it's like a rock track. So I look at like an SSL E or a G series and compare the two of those. Each console will have a different flavor, a different characteristic. And while you may not have them all, I'm sure you have a few. And even if you have just a membership with the Plugin Alliance, for example, you all of a sudden have a pretty wide range of consoles to select from that you can work with and apply to a mix and get used to working with. So what I wanted to show is sort of the results of that. And this is something that I did in the Mixing with Mike class in early January of 2021. And all I did was part of this was doing a console shootout. And I went a little bit farther than what I normally do. But what I wanted to do was just go through the process a little bit just to kind of show you some of the different sonic characteristics that you can get from it. So let's start just the raw tracks, and then I'm going to start bringing in these channel strips one at a time, and I'll display them what they are, just so you can get a sense for the different tonal character and sound from each.
You're trying, you lose me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and cheat ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell. You're trying, you lose me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and cheat ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell. You're trying, you lose me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and cheat ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell. You're trying, you lose me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and cheat ain't bad like me. Don't believe the lies that you tell. You're trying, you lose me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell.
So depending upon what kind of sound I was going for, I ended up here on the API. I got a whole variety of different sounds here. The API has a very punchy, bright characteristic, and if I wanted to go with this very clean, bright, very responsive, nice depth field kind of thing, I could go with the API. And when I started to dial this in, things came together very quickly. Maybe got a little dramatic with some of the EQs in there, but as I was making the adjustments and going through the process of using it, I could feel like, oh yeah, when I EQ the vocal, this really, grabs, I feel like it's giving me a sound that I want to hear as I go through each thing. Now, I may be focused on a different approach. Like I may want a very punchy, bright, clean kind of approach, or maybe I want something that's a little bit more R&B flavor, right? And I think actually the BX Console N sounded very good for that. Seemed to give the best characteristics of a warm, rich sound on the low end, nice and balanced through the mid range, and a nice, clean, airy top end. And maybe that's the sound I want to go for. Or, maybe I want to take it a little bit more of a pop direction. So I go with the, one of the two API discs, which both sound very good for that. Or maybe I want something that's sort of a hybrid of both of those, and I go with the J series. It has a little bit of the crisp punchiness of the API, but a little bit more warmth, perhaps, in this case. Whatever I decide here, and whatever approach, I have options. And each one of these felt different. When I actually grabbed the J series and started working with it, it didn't kind of fall into place. I felt not so much that I was fighting it, but it wasn't necessarily easy as I was dialing in EQ settings. Love the compression, though, and the way that the compression works. So that happened to work out really well. The API console, the American Class A, had kind of the best, had a nice combination of the two, where I liked the compression, not quite as much as the J series, but the EQ really worked out well. I really like the way that dialed in better than the J series. So there's some trade-off. And with each decision that I make and with each option that I go through, I get a better sense for what might work. Now, this is important, and this is something that really, if you just grabbed a handful of tracks even, list the primary tracks, and even if you just, stem some of the things down just to do kind of a quick EQ of the overall drums or whatever, you could get a feel for what's going to work most efficiently. And so that 45 minutes, let's say you spend an hour kind of going through a couple different console options. If you have something that just seems to be a very good fit for the song and is giving you the sound that you want, you'll save yourself hours and hours and hours and hours of time if you tried to fight with something that you normally use just because you're used to it, and all of the adjustments seem to be frustrating. It's such a simple thing, and it's one of the most beautiful things about working inside a DAW is that you have these options. And whatever you decide to do, if you decide you want to add like another tonal color layer by adding in preamps, because often things like that can help to balance out certain things like this. So let's say, for example, I wanted to add like a little bit of Neve richness to this. So maybe I go ahead and I add in a Neve preamp. Let's see if I can dial that in. All right, there we go. And I just dial that in all the way across. So helps if I add the shortcut in there. Maybe try one more time. Here we go. There we go. So now if I add this in, say, with the API, which is, maybe needs a little bit of warmth and body into it, let's see what happens.
You're trying, you lose me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase and she ain't bad like me, don't believe the lies that you tell.
That might be a better match with the J series.
You're trying, you lose me, thinking that you could leave me, losing all the lies that you tell. The one who you chase.
Yeah, see, that ends up being a better match. So I might try something different. Maybe I go to a tape emulation, or I go to a different Neve preamp, or maybe I just don't need anything at all since the preamps on many of these are emulated already. If you get the basic idea, having this consistent kind of sound that works through the production ends up being a valuable way of gluing everything together. Now when you go to make something stand out like the vocal, it's very easy. Maybe you replace the EQ that you used on the channel strip and you use a Pultec EQ, or you use something different. Maybe use an 1176 for the compression instead of using the channel compressor. Now it has a unique processing layer that differs from the general processing layer that everything else has. Another instrument maybe you want to feature is the bass. Maybe you want to feature the clap or the backbeat, or maybe one of the keyboard instruments. Now you can selectively decide where you want that unique tonal coloration, and now it has a background from which it can contrast. It's such an important way of approaching the mix, and a really valuable lesson that I carried over from my experience of working in studios, and that's why I really wanted to pass it on to you. I mean, I work this way with every mix that I do. I almost do everything with a channel strip, and channel strips don't always beat out digital. Sometimes I'll use FabFilter Pro Q3 or use Neutron if it's something that I feel like that just actually seems to serve the production better. And they also have a sound. It's not quite as unique and signature as what you have here, but maybe if you really need a lot of flexibility in terms of the EQ work, that kind of processing chain can also work out as well. So there you have it. Just a simple boot camp tip, selecting a console and sound for your mix. Remember that you always want to be working with the tools that are that best match the production and the sound that you're going for. It's not always the same. If I did the same shootout with 4 other songs, I would probably end up with 4 different console selections for each one. There you have it. Bootcamp tip, selecting a console and sound for your mix. These tips and millions of others, literally millions of others, are in the Mixing with Mike Bootcamp at mixingwithmike.com. Go ahead there and check it out. It's a 52-week program. Each week you get 3 to 5 hours worth of lessons and content, multi-tracks to mix with, and commercial mix analysis, and all kinds of other goodies in terms of different techniques, mixing techniques. I answer every question in the course, so anything that you have questions about from the lessons, I'm the one that actually answers all of those questions for everybody that comes through the course. I fully support it, and will continue to do so. Check it out. If you got a chance, mixingwithmike.com.